we were waiting for people to come on.
There you go. This is so cool. Listen, I am such like a noob at all things streaming. So
Yes.
seeing it like, oh, you're streaming live on YouTube. Whoa.
Also, same. Okay. Do you hear us looping? Yes. Mute that. Okay, but so we're actually live. And yeah, I never knew this existed and was like trying to do all this research. Like, can we do a live on YouTube with two people? Because I wanted all the videos to be in one place. Because some people want to do a pre-recorded. So I was like, okay. And people are like, oh yeah, you could just stream from Zoom. And I was like, I've never even heard about that. And we do Zoom for work all day. Yeah.
No
so
clue.
They were like, oh, you just need to get this level of Zoom and then you'll be good.
See, and I'm pretty sure that I've explored this level of Zoom for work purposes and have never once noticed that we could have been posting these to YouTube.
I'm also doing that. Yeah, I also like couldn't find it. I was trying to, you need like the pro version, and for work I know we have a like higher version, but I didn't know if it was pro. I figured there was just like one level, and then when I told like Zoom upgrade, it was like 7 levels and none of them were pro. So I was like, oh, this isn't helpful. And then I like it and found it and I was like, okay.
I also feel like probably the Zoom people, like as a corporation, are just like on the fly making it all up.
100%.
They're like, oh, we had no idea this was gonna blow up.
100%, which is really funny because I've seen so many of those like posts that like joke about Skype and all these other video services having like 10 years of a leg up on Zoom. Like Zoom is so new and all these other people have been around for so long and like they really dropped the ball in 2020.
They for sure did.
Yep.
What you gonna do, man?
Cool. So we're live. People start trickling in. I have YouTube up over here on my split screen. So if people are like posting or sharing or asking questions, I'll try and share that back if that fits in. If that's for that, if not, then
I am adding you to my story right now, so hopefully some of my followers will pop on over and say hey too.
Cool.
Hooray! That is literally how I search for gifts, is I say hooray as I'm looking for the perfect cute gift. I don't know about you, but it is definitely like a good part of my day, finding a gift.
If you ever saw, I don't think they have it like this, but you know how like a Google search history, like when you type in, if you ever saw my gift search history, it is like the funniest and most specific things. I'll be like dog on 2 legs dancing and they're like no results. And I'm like, okay, dog dancing, standing up. And they're like, no, that's not how this works, Brianna. And I'm like, I'm sorry.
My biggest gripe with Instagram is that I can't save my favorite gifts. I want to save my favorites. I don't understand why they won't let me do that.
Yes. I'm sure it's intentional. So you have to do all of them every time.
I hate it. Because I'm like, I'm never going to find it again.
Yeah, exactly. I share that.
Yep.
So people are starting to trickle in. Laura's here. Hi, Laura.
Hi.
I say we go ahead and jump in and get started if that's okay with you. And then
that sounds good to me.
Cool. All righty. Everybody, welcome back to the Self-Care Collaborative. We are in week 3. Right, Kelly Wendy? Yep, week 3, which is crazy. I'm Brianna, and I am the dyer, designer, organizer behind the Little Wolf Knits and the Self-Care Collaborative. I'm super excited that you're here with us. If this is your first time, welcome. The rest of the videos are saved on my YouTube. Definitely go check those out because some other makers have shared some really cool stuff. If you're coming back, thank you for coming back. This one is going to be a really great one. I'm super excited about it. And And if you're watching along in these videos, I want to share this because I was going to share this last time and I forgot. If you're watching along with these videos and participating in some of the challenges that we're throwing out, make sure you're posting about it. Make sure you're using the hashtag Self-Care Collaborative 2020 and tag me, because there are going to be some really cool prizes for the giveaway that I'm thinking I'm going to pull monthly. And it's been really cool to follow the hashtag and see what people are posting. Even if it's not, a lot of people have been posting just like resources or fun images they've found about self-care and what that means, or other people's posts. And I'm like, yes, this is amazing.
It is a really happy hashtag to follow.
Right? It's like, so
I'm very happy following it.
when I need a minute, I'm like, I'm just going to scroll through this for a second.
Yeah, it always comes up very serendipitously, like heavy stuff, and then self-care collaborative.
Same. I will believe that's the universe doing something for us.
Sure.
One thing for us this year.
It follows us.
So if you're not posting, definitely get in on the action. If you're not following, follow the hashtag, because it's really cool to do. And I'm super excited for tonight's video because I'm here with someone that is actually vital to this collaborative happening. So Maressa is someone, you probably know her as Maressa Made on Instagram, and I'll let her introduce herself in a second. But I want to share a little tidbit with y'all that you might not know. A few months ago, I'd been thinking about this basically self-care collaborative since last year when I did a self-care cal, and obviously did not have the presence that I do now on Instagram, and it didn't get this sort of participation I was hoping for or wishing for. And so I wanted to kind of revamp it this year, but I was a little bit intimidated and didn't know if it was something that folks would be interested in, or honestly, if I could pull it off. And way back when, it feels like months ago, it might have been at this point, I took a chance and just sent this Instagram account who I was like so inspired by. I was like, oh my God, this girl is amazing. Like, she brings me so much joy and so much inspiration just in all of the things that she does. And was like,
start off with making my face hot already.
I was like, I'm just gonna send her a message, and it's probably gonna be really creepy, and like she's gonna be like, who the heck is this girl? Like, block, like what the heck? And I was like, whatever, worst case, like I feel rejected and I put my head down, and then I'll be fine in a minute. And like I don't even remember what I messaged you. I don't know, maybe you do. I totally don't. But it was something about like, hey, I'm having this idea for this thing. I'm not exactly sure what it's going to look like, but I want you to be involved. Like it feels like you're a big inspiration here. I want you to be involved. And we chatted a little bit, and you actually helped shape what this whole collaborative looked like. And so I'm super excited for you to be here because this feels like it's part of you and part yours, even if you don't feel that way. I feel
I really appreciate that, but I definitely feel like those interactions that I had with you, I just felt like she's onto something amazing, and she just needs like a confidence booster cheerleader, and I'm real good at that.
I mean, it worked, so.
For sure. Yeah. I was so incredibly excited when you were like, it's happening, we're doing it.
Oh, cool. Yeah, and then even in planning, I'm like, oh wow, I got this confidence boost, and then I was like, no one is going to do this. Like, this is never going to happen. And so I'm really grateful you're here. I'm so excited. I know other people, I know my followers are super excited. Wendy, they're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're talking to Maressa. This is like unreal. And I feel like we're cheating a little bit, because I know over on your Patreon is where you share a lot of this wisdom that you're sharing with us tonight. So I'm like, oh, like we get a little sneak peek of like what that's always see.
For sure.
And so I'm super grateful. That was a really long introduction. Go ahead, introduce yourself, tell the people who you are, what they need. where they can find you.
Okay, so I am Maressa Fernandez. Sometimes I'm Kayla Fernandez, as we discovered earlier. So you might know me as both. I work during the day at Magpie Fibers, which is an indie dyed yarn company out of Frederick, Maryland. And then at night, I put on my Batman cape and I do empowering and affirming content for makers and creatives. I'm really passionate about trying to instill in other creatives that what they do is of value and is worthy and should be shared with others. So I work really hard to try to find like topics and themes that I think makers and creatives struggle with, and kind of focus on not just like shedding a light on what we all struggle with, but how can we like implement action items to get past those things. I'm very much a doer, not just a watcher. So I want people to feel empowered to do the same. So I do that on Instagram, and then Patreon helps fund me to be able to put out free and accessible content on Instagram for everyone too. So yay!
So if you're not following Maressa, go follow at Maressa Made. If you're not a patron, go support her, because what she's bringing to us is like invaluable and, I don't know, priceless in my mind. So like go do the things. Maybe at some point you'll share a little bit, because I think what you're doing over there has a lot of overlap with this collaborative and what's going on now. And I know you shared a little bit about that on Instagram. So maybe you'll, at some point, even if it's not now, we'll get a chance to hear a little bit about what your content over there is looking like, if folks are interested or want to get involved, and if you have ideas about like what's coming next.
Sure.
Cool.
Yeah, happy to share.
Cool. So first thing to start, I think now we know a little bit about like who you are, and not too much about like who you are. And so I'm curious and wondering if you'd be willing to share a bit about how you got like your journey in this community, not only the fiber arts, but I would say like the maker community, because you do a lot of different things.
Yeah.
Not only having to do with yarn.
Yeah, I think that, so kind of what happened was that I was in a very lonely place in my life. My husband, we were a military family. I was a stay-at-home mom at the time. I have 4 kids now, but at the time I had 2 and was pregnant with my 3rd. And I was lonely, girl. My friends that I had made in my neighborhood had recently moved away, which is just part of the struggle of being a military wife. You make like these really long lasting relationships that then you get ripped apart all the time. So I just like on a whim decided I was gonna knit. I'd been crocheting for a really long time and was just like, I'm gonna knit. I'm gonna do something for myself because I deserve something. And I think through that, I started experimenting and getting over that first hump of like, I'm going to make my first post of putting something on Instagram and I'm going to get like maybe 4 likes, and that's okay. And I think like from there, it just kind of snowballed, that I found so much inspiration in our community, so much creativity, and just like more and more I started to search like specific hashtags, where I would search like Black knitters of Instagram, people of color sewists, stuff like that, where I could see myself reflected back as a maker. And that was really important to me, to make sure that I was represented in those hashtags, and that I was also representing for those hashtags in other larger hashtags too. So that really became like a personal, like, okay, like we have something cool going on here, and we should be represented in all these other big, huge, you know, thousands and thousands of posts, hashtags too. So that's kind of where I started out at. And then I think that over time, I went through like a slump of creativity, as we kind of all do. It's like, I like to call it like the roller coaster. You go up and down, up and down. And I was going through a slump, and I started writing myself these little letters that were like little, like, you can do it letters for my creativity. And that's what led into my Maker Affirmations posts, which is what most people know me for now. They started off as like a written content where I took those letters that I was writing to myself and instead applied them to like creative community at large. In a broader sense, not just me and my knitting, but I wanted to include like woodworkers and watercolor artists and whomever, like that your making is artistry. And then that turned into video content so I could make it more accessible to a broader community. And now I do a lot of those. And that's kind of here.
And I mean, this is so cool to hear and kind of see what that evolution looked like kind of before I was on this journey with you. So I didn't know that like early part of your in this community. When did you start crocheting, and when did you eventually like say, okay, maybe I'm going to teach myself to knit and get into this? How long has that been?
So crocheting, I had already been crocheting for about 5 years before I started knitting. And I think crocheting was more like an on and off. I'm bored and I have no friends right now, so I'm gonna crochet. And that's kind of how I approach knitting too. I'm bored, so I'm just gonna try to tackle this project. And after I started knitting, that was 3 years ago, maybe. So 3 years ago, that's exactly, I started knitting and started my Instagram account at the same exact time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it just is one of those things that I think I found my niche and my people at the exact right moment, very like serendipitously. And then all of that also happened at the same time as conversations about diversifying your feed and like, are you following more makers who have something to say who are not just white makers? And so I think that all of those things played into it together. It would be disingenuous for me to say that it doesn't play into it. But I think that I had something of value to say to white communities and BIPOC communities too. And I do represent for both of them.
Yeah, and that's so cool because that feels so important and so like fundamental to who you are. Like I hear that thread throughout of like, there's this need in this community and there's this need for myself personally, like to see myself reflected back. And so how can I combine those two things and make it happen? And I really appreciate, I think this is something you share on Instagram too, that like, it's not about the goals or like having X number of followers or reaching this. It's about finding your people, finding your community, and bringing what you have, whatever talents, whatever identities, whatever your personhood is, to your account, and like your people will come and be there. I'll help you and you'll help them, and it'll be that mutual kind of.
And I don't think I say this often enough. So I grew fairly quickly from like 0 followers to 1,000. So I went 1 year from 0 to 1,000, and then the next year 1,000 to 3,000, and then that following year is where it shit hit the fan. Sorry. and we grew a little crazily, not as sustainably as the other growth was. And I always try to remember that at 1,000 followers and less, I had still found my people. At 3,000 followers and less, I'd still found my people. Like I was still talking to them, and those people are still my followers. They're still the ones that comment the most. They're still the ones that love me the most. They're still my people. I'm just noticing now that they are finding more people for me. They're like, hey, I know you like the same stuff I like. You should come over here and check her out. So that is a cool experience to experience now, where it's a friend of a friend of a friend is hanging out with me. So and I think
that's so cool.
For smaller creators to think about, like, you have your people no matter how small the number is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so cool. And I think that's super helpful. I think for anyone, like regardless of your follower count or whatever that looks like. The other thing, Maressa, that I hear like in your story and your journey through this community is like the crafts, I guess I found them or they found me at different points in my life where like I needed something. I was feeling lonely or I was feeling like I was in a slump. And so talk to me a little bit about how self-care has kind of been a part of that journey, or maybe not, or if it's a totally separate journey. Like what has that self-care looked like for you as a human in this world? I guess across.
I think my journey with self-care has had a really big evolution, especially over these last 3 years, because my self-care needs have changed, my boundaries have changed. As you kind of have this influx of new followers, you find certain things out that press your buttons that you didn't know would press your buttons before. And so self-care for me has been setting safe boundaries around what crafting does for me in like my own self-care practice, and then also what is off limits for me to share. I had to give myself that boundary in order to kind of designate this is a work apparatus, a work leg of what's happening for me, and this is mine and mine alone. So unfortunately, that means a lot of times that knitting and or sewing is no longer self-care for me. I do still enjoy it. It does still bring me joy. It just brings me a different type of joy, and I've come to accept that it brings me a different kind of joy. And I focus on the other aspects of that also are kind of a little more mine than they are a community thing. So if I'm knitting and I am trying to knit to a deadline for a collaboration with someone, I'm more so focused on the photography that's going to come at the end of it, because that's a portion of my creativity that I feel really joyful about right now. And then there's also stuff that I just don't share at all. So embroidery is something that I've been really into. I don't share it.
Needle, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Needle felting is something that I'm getting into. I don't share it. And I think that somehow like reclaimed it for me as a self-care practice, because crafting was kind of moving into the section of like, this is business and only business. And I needed to create a space where I felt like I'm doing something that engages my creativity and it doesn't have to be work related. And I think another layer of that too is that I work at a hand-dyed yarn company, right? So that adds like another layer of it on top of it that other people might not necessarily have. So I just needed to completely separate myself and find a whole new craft that made me happy in a different way. And embroidery and needle felting have done that.
That's awesome. I also love, this idea that you bring in that like, it has evolved so much over time. And as my life circumstances have changed, as like the places I occupy physically, like for my work, online, my presence has changed. What I need to do to take care of myself has also changed. And that feels so important to highlight, because I think I see a lot of times too, clients who are like, well, this is what I do to take care of myself. And I've done that since I was 12. And it's like, okay, well, life has kind of changed a bit since then. Is it possible that maybe you need to evolve what that looks like?
You're a bit older now, boo-boo.
It's a little different, like college, like, right, I work in a college. So I'm like, being a senior in college is probably a little bit different than that you were in 7th grade. But like, let's think about that.
Right. And that's a formative time in your life to really discover what actual self-care practices look like. Because I feel like you have an idea, and there's also like this weird commercialization of what self-care looks like. So I talk to a lot of younger people on Instagram that have this sense of what they think or what's been marketed to them as what self-care is. And I'm like, well, we could flesh it out just a little more. It's not just a bubble bath.
That is probably my most frequent conversation with people, especially not only that I talk to one-on-one, but people who a lot of times come consult with us in the office, and they're like, hey, we want to do this self-care event. We're going to give out face masks. And I'm like, all right, so let's hold on for a minute and let's think about what self-care looks like. And I don't know if you've seen, I think it was Kelly after our first chat ended up sending me on Instagram the perfect image for exactly what we were talking about. Our phones were probably listening to us and like gave us that, but it was like an iceberg, and it was like the self-care iceberg, and the tip of the iceberg that you could see was like doing something that brings you joy, a bubble bath, getting a hug from a friend, all of those, I think, very whitewashed, privileged kind of what you see in the media, like this is what self-care looks like.
Superficial version.
Underneath is like healing traumas, having difficult conversations, setting boundaries, like all of those things that we don't really think about as self-care, or that society, I guess, doesn't think about as self-care. And
well, so I think we think about self-care making us feel better. And so for a lot of people, they characterize that as self-care makes you feel better in the short term, and it's not. It's self-care makes you feel better in the long term, but you've got to walk through some fire first.
Yep.
Yeah, like setting boundaries is not fun. I don't particularly enjoy not sharing like stuff with people. I don't like that. I'm a sharer. That's who I am. But the fact that I had to be like, no, this is just for me and I'm not going to let you guys have a portion of it was uncomfortable but necessary for me. And that's just like a small superficial boundary, So.
Yeah, I always say, I'm like, there's a difference between feeling better and getting better. And like sometimes the getting better doesn't feel so great. Like, and that's okay if we can tie it to the fact that this is going to help me be where I want to be. It's going to help me. It's in line with my values. It's on that longer term trajectory than just what feels good right now in this moment.
Growth is uncomfortable.
Yep.
Growth is always uncomfortable. And it's what I have to keep telling myself every day. This is uncomfortable, but I'm growing.
I'm curious too, if you could share a little bit about how you maybe realize when you're at that point where you need to set a boundary, or you need to do something different, or maybe find a new hobby that you don't share with the world. And like, what does that process look like for you in navigating some of that ebb and flow of taking care of yourself?
Yeah, I think that's a really good and really difficult question. So for anyone who doesn't know that's watching this, I suffer from anxiety and depression. So for me, unfortunately, when I have had a boundary that I'm ignoring that I need to set, it usually manifests in a panic attack of some type. I wish and I hope that one day I can get to a point where I recognize that this is happening. But I'm naturally a people pleaser. So as I'm people pleasing, and it for me always centers around some type of people pleasing.
Yep.
As I'm doing that, I'm slowly realizing that I'm growing more and more uncomfortable over time. And it normally manifests for me in a very like, all of this must stop right now. Because I can't have panic attacks every day and also take care of my 4 children. That's just not possible for me now. So I can give a really blunt example. I had to close story replies for me on my Instagram. I was getting content back from people that was at times a little vitriolic. And then also I was taking in a lot of content from a lot of people who were trying to process their own trauma. And I, at that time and place in my life, was like, this is okay. I'm doing a good service for others. They're at least feel comfortable to come to me with this. But I am also not a licensed professional. So as that stuff kind of continued to come in, I realized that I needed very, very quickly, like, I already have my own trauma that I'm dealing with racist issues that have happened in my life, with consistent racism happening just across the board to me on a daily basis. Like, my experience walking into a grocery store is not the same as other people's experience. And I live in a predominantly white area. So take that for what you will.
Mhm.
And taking in other people's trauma that was very intense just got to a tipping point for me. So at that point I said, okay, what's healthy for me right now is to not have any story replies. So people cannot respond. If they want to respond, they can still seek me out to respond.
Mhm.
You can still go through and DM me and whatever, but you have to do just a tiny bit more work to do that. And that's okay. Because I think that maybe will give you a second of pause to decide whether or not you should send me that. Hopefully.
Yeah, that feels, I'm like really appreciative of your vulnerability in that. And I'm really feeling happy that I asked that question and was feeling a bit hesitant about it.
No, I'm
Because
glad.
sometimes people see, you know, people on Instagram or real life who are like doing it right. And they're like, wow, they're really good at that thing. And like, you're good at this, right? This is what you do. And this is a big part. This is important to you. This is your practice to take care of yourself, to empower other people to take care of themselves. And you're a human. So, like, that's also really helpful, I think, for me. And I hope for other people to recognize that, like, you're also not perfect. And so part of this process is still, oh, sometimes it gets to a boiling point or a breaking point for me. I wish it didn't. Maybe one day that's something I could work toward, but also acknowledging the reality that, like, yeah, that's where I'm at right now. And so
Right.
that's
This is the reality that I live with. Anxiety is the reality. So at some point I have to recognize that for me, it's about the practice of it and not about the perfection of it.
Yep.
I think you get this, you're seeing Polaroids of me, right? You're seeing snapshots of me in good moments where I feel like sharing, enraged moments where I feel like sharing, moments where I'm feeling silly, those kind of things. But you're not getting the total picture of who I am at all times. I'm not, discussing on a daily basis that at one point in my life I was suicidal. I'm not discussing on a daily basis that at one point I was medicated. Like, I'm not discussing those things with you.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not seeing the progression of how I learned to set boundaries. You just see the hard boundary come down where I shut the wall down.
Yeah.
So I think it's good for people to just take that in for a second as you're looking at these people that you hold up as role models, and to recognize they're humans just like you. They're going through tough shit just like you are. So.
Yeah. Like, you might not know the context behind this decision, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Like, they probably have a very good reason for doing this thing that they're doing. And they might not be doing it because it's easy or fun or like just for shits and gigs, but like remembering that, oh yes, this person is also trying to get through the same shit that I'm getting through, the same year. I don't know their struggles. I don't know their life. And it's making me think too about something I've touched on the last few weeks, is what some of the challenges or like barriers that come up in terms of taking care of yourself. And you're giving me a lot of information that I could guess or like make hypotheses about, but I'm curious what that looks like in your life, not only with, the people that you interact with and on your Instagram, but like you're saying, like as a Black woman living in Frederick, Maryland, as a mom, as someone who, I don't know if you're still in a military family, but I imagine whether that's present or not, that's still part of your context and your history. And so I'm curious what those challenges look like for you.
I think that I'm kind of in a new space and sphere of what I'm comfortable we touched a little bit about it before, of what I am comfortable and not comfortable sharing. And I'm also learning that my boundaries are not the same boundaries as somebody else's, and that I need to respect that they haven't set that boundary because it doesn't need to exist for them. I have stopped sharing as many pictures of like my children and stuff on my feed, as much as I love to share them with everybody. It only takes a couple of weird messages before you're like, ah. So for me, making sure that like my sanity as a mother was still intact and making sure that I felt responsible as a parent involves me kind of stepping back from that. And if I touch on my motherhood, it's in a very vague sense for my children now, to kind of protect them in my space. My brother came to visit, and he has just kind of a fairly normal Instagram. I share pictures of my food and and what I did today. The end. So like, as any uncle would do, he like shared a whole bunch of pictures of my kids all over his Instagram and Facebook. I realized that. I like lost it. I just was very, very concerned because he had tagged me. And so then I felt like people could find it and blah, blah, blah. And I think that I had to take a step back and realize that an obstacle for me now is realizing that my boundaries are not everybody else's boundaries, and I can't hold them to those same things. If I had had a conversation with him prior, this might have not happened, and I need to be held accountable for that in my own self-care. Because I'm a people pleaser, I didn't talk to him about it. And so there's an element of accountability there for me, an element of accountability for him also, and that he didn't have a discussion with me about it. But that regardless, his boundaries are his and mine are mine, and we're individual and unique humans in that sense. And that's something that I'm still kind of processing and learning and trying to come to terms with, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, and that sounds tough because I imagine it goes both ways, that like, yes, you have to learn about the people in your life and their boundaries and how to respect those or come to terms with those when it's maybe not what you would do. But I imagine it's also hard for folks in your life who have been around maybe before these boundaries were put up. I'm thinking, especially as a people pleaser and knowing a bit of that myself, that like when you've been one way for a really long time and then you start to say, actually, that doesn't work for me, people get like a little prickly or not too happy about that. So I imagine there's a bit that goes both ways there.
Yeah, there is definitely some friction. And also, I have to take into account too that I have the ability to know who I can see in them, the person that I was, and I know the person that I am now, and I'm in a different space. They're not in this space with me. So without that frame of reference, it's much harder for them to understand where I'm coming from. They're like, you closed your Instagram replies. Why would you do that? So, like, they don't understand because they've never opened their Instagram app and had 47 new story replies, and that doesn't even count the ones that are like in the unknown inbox, and like they haven't experienced that. And so that's unique to my own experience, and I have to, I don't know if that's the people pleaser in me saying that, but I have to cut them like a tiny bit of slack in not being able to see from that same frame of reference, whereas I have the perspective to see in my own and see in theirs too.
Yeah. And I mean, hearing that, I also don't know if that's coming from the people pleaser place or not, but it sounds like it's workable for you. Like it's helpful for you too, to hold a little bit of space, not for your own stuff, but also recognizing that other people have their stuff and their experience of you, and they don't necessarily know this new spot or what your day-to-day looks like. And so holding some space for them to not slip up, but I guess just to be human in those moments and not do the perfect thing.
And I always think it's a good thing when they experience one of my new boundaries. I know that that's weird.
Mhm.
To kind of, I'm in a new, I'm in a space now where I don't mind setting boundaries, and I don't mind saying the phrase, "I'm setting a boundary with you," and that's not
Mhm.
um, always what I would have said before. But
Yeah.
I always feel like it's a good conversation to have because just like everyone else, they're also only seeing snapshots and Polaroids of oh my gosh, look at Kayla's account, look at Maressa's account, blah, 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 right? And they are not necessarily seeing the day-to-day battles that come along with that. And that gives me an opportunity to grow in my relationship with them and be vulnerable with them in that moment and be like,
Mhm.
well, why don't we sit down here and look at my phone for a second?
I
um,
love that. I love I it's funny that you say like, "Oh, I kind of appreciate those moments." Because the people who know me really well, I say they find it endearing. They might also find it annoying that, like, sometimes when they go to do something, they're like, "Oh, I hope it goes smoothly," or like, "Oh, I'm going to talk to my mom about this hard thing. I hope it goes okay," or like, "I hope she's just understanding." And I'm like, I mean, yeah, and also I kind of hope it doesn't, so you can practice doing the hard thing and like get better at it. And they're always, okay, but just for once, like I hope it goes smoothly. And I'm like, okay, just for once, like I'll give it. But I love that because it's not just you having to practice that thing that's so important for your care. It's also the two of you as a dyad, as a pair, learning to grow your relationship and have those like uncomfortable growth moments that like, yeah, this doesn't feel so good right now, but I know that when there's a rupture and we can fix it, it's actually going to be better for us in the long run. It doesn't feel good, but it'll help us get better because we'll be stronger after.
right. And I think that being as open as you can in like the portions of those like divergences is just the most helpful ever, because I think that in the beginning, as like I would like open my phone and be like, oh, I have 1,000 new followers. um, as that was happening, it wasn't necessarily sharing with my husband things that were making me uncomfortable. He was just experiencing like and
Mhm.
seeing my normal anxiety triggers, but he's
Yeah.
not really understanding what is happening. He's just
Mhm.
like, whoa, I thought we were in a good space. um, and so with that, there definitely came another tipping point where I had to be like, okay, I'm just gonna just word vomit on you all the time when these things happen so that you know exactly what the lead up is, because without this other evidence as we're climbing up this hill to the tipping point, you don't understand how I got here. You're just looking at me from 0 to 60.
Mhm.
And so I think that openness with him has really been really good for our relationship. He's also kind of learned like some, especially from a social media etiquette standpoint, he understands more like, should you be letting them do that? Like, that's a question that happens now. Like, well, do you need to let them stop doing that?
Mm.
Do you need to delete that comment? Do you need to whatever it is that is causing me anxiety? He's very quick to come up with a probing question now. Like, well, now I know this and this and this and this has already led you to a tipping point. Do we want to go back up that hill one more time?
Mhm.
So,
So, I mean, that's so cool to hear how that like transparency, that openness, that communication has helped. It sounds like not only him and not only you, but it helped the two of you work on this together. And I know something for folks who haven't seen it, when Kelly and I talked, we talked a little bit about how her partner is so important to her taking care of herself. And like it's weird, like I don't know, it feels funny to have to rely on someone else for things like that. And we talked a bit about how that's what a relationship is and that's what community is, right? And when she is able to take that time to give back to that community, to that relationship, she's also seeing that as a form of self-care because that relationship is something that helps take care of herself. That feels really circular.
No, I love that though.
In what you're saying too. Like I have to take care of my relationship with my partner so that he can help me and then we can be in the same spot and work on the same.
Yeah, it feels like that discomfort of me sharing, because I don't want to ever tell him that anything is wrong, because then it's like, oh, well, let's go back down this road again. But the discomfort in me sharing it and the vulnerability in me sharing it makes him feel more trusted. And then
Mm.
that then rebuilds trust between each other, because then we're both like on the same page about how we're going to move forward. And it's been like a discussion now where when we talk about the Instagram account, we talk about the Instagram account. Like we talk about it as, oh, on Maressa made,
Mm.
blah, 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 blah. So it's very much like its own entity that we're discussing together and a problem that
Uh-huh.
we're tackling together. So I think that that kind of helps create a more united fronts,
Mm-hmm.
like the anxiety that it induces for me, which is nice.
Yeah. I like that idea too. It's like creating some distance. Like this is not me or my account. Like this is its entity. And
Yeah.
I know people do that a lot too with like their anxiety or their depression, like viewing it as this thing that's like a separate, yeah, it's in me, but it's not me. It's like the separate thing. And so it makes it a bit easier to like talk about or navigate in some way.
Right. And it
Yeah.
also feel like it makes it gives me some distance from it as well, which is also another healthy boundary, so that I am realizing that what I am posting today is good for Maressa made, but it might not be good for Maressa the person.
Mm-hmm.
So then that allows me to kind of think about what I'm putting out there and think about, am I crossing a boundary for myself, or am I sharing something that is actually something that I want to share and that doesn't cross a boundary for me or Maressa.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so cool. And it also, I mean, it sounds tricky. It sounds complicated.
Very
You're
much so.
throwing a bunch of different like obstacles and challenges. And I imagine there are some people out there who would hear something like this and say, like, that sounds too hard. I'm just not gonna do it. And I don't know, I'll just deal with the repercussions after the fact. But like what keeps you going on this journey? What keeps you committed to taking care of yourself, considering how challenging it can be at times?
I think the more that I take care of myself, the more that I can healthily share with others.
Hmm.
Because the further distance I get from all the obstacles that I'm attempting to conquer, it's like the larger the vista is for me to kind of look back and see it and kind of move around it in a 3D perspective, to then be like, oh, well, it might be helpful if I shared this perspective of this problem with somebody else, because if I'm experiencing this, so many more people might be. And I don't think I can ever get there without setting a boundary for something first, because I
Mm.
have to have the space to kind of really think about it and discuss it internally with myself. And that usually ends up in some kind of journal capacity
Yeah.
before I can share it with anyone else. But I think it makes me more effective in the way that I share with others about how I feel like they should feel more empowered, if that makes sense.
Yeah. That like I guess it sounds like, well, it's not really an option if I want to continue doing the thing that I'm doing. If that's going to be sustainable, this is part of how I fuel that.
Yeah. Yeah, my husband and I have talked a lot about how it's almost as if I am working through things like a month or 2 months before they're coming out on Instagram. Like as I'm kind of moving goalposts for myself, I'm like, oh, well, that would be helpful to share. And sometimes those things happen immediately and they go straight to stories and I talk about it immediately. And other times I kind of sit with it and process it and try to find the most effective way to move forward in expressing whatever it I feel would be an actionable item. Because I'm not, even though I might have feel like I have overcome an obstacle, I'm not necessarily ready to share an actionable item on it. I haven't dissected what my action item was yet.
Yeah.
So it kind of takes time and space for me to figure out But I think I'm in this unique space where with what I do on Instagram, it's like a necessity for me to give myself the space to process those things.
Yeah. It also sounds like, I mean, hearing you explain it, I'm reminded it's of like someone in athletics or like physical fitness that like, it sounds like you're almost building endurance, that like the more you do it, it doesn't always become easier because you're always pushing yourself to do different things and run farther. But the easier it is to keep doing it because you have that momentum. Whereas, like, oh, if I were to stop or take a break here or not take care of myself for a little bit, it would get really hard to get back on that or like pick that momentum back up because I would be so far away from it. There would be so much distance there.
It's absolutely that. I really like, I'm a lover of analogies. So I love like talking about your creative journey as being like a creative muscle and how you need to exercise that, but also muscles become exhausted. Muscles need rest. Muscles need restoration. They need fuel. They need all different things in order for you to keep getting stronger within your creativity and however that manifests. And I think that it also means that you can't just stop working it out. So you give yourself the rest and relaxation that you need, but you also have to have the, I don't know, the gumption to like get back on the horse and realize like this workout's gonna suck, but we're gonna do it. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And so I guess then all of this, and I'm sure, Maressa, I could like keep talking for hours. I will save the people from that. And hopefully this isn't the last conversation we have. But I guess I'm thinking of all of this. I'm thinking about some of the things that you're doing in your different spaces. And I'm wondering, I know we didn't talk about this too much before, so I might be putting you on the spot a little bit. But the past 2 weeks, we've done some sort of like call to action or like homework assignment or challenge for folks to try out and just try on. Whether it's this week or just at some point in this collaborative. And I'm curious if you have an idea or something that you would like to encourage people to try and see how it feels.
I can do that. We've been talking a little bit on Patreon where our theme for the month is self-discovery. And I'm very passionate about self-discovery is self-care. If you don't know yourself, you can't know how to make yourself better. So within that, I think that there's a portion of self-discovery that people are kind of wary of doing, and that's kind of really digging into what's considered their faults. The parts of themselves that make other people uncomfortable, whether that's being stubborn, having a fiery temper, those kind of things. But I think that if you're a unique human being, it's an essential part of you, and therefore it's an essential part of your creativity because you can't have your unique expression without that portion of you. So I think what I would challenge people to do is think about what part of their personality is maybe considered a fault, and how it could actually be fueling their creativity in a positive way. That's a hard one though.
Love it. And I think the cool part and what I like about what you've shared, I think the theme of tonight and with this challenge is that it's not about the answer. Like it's not necessarily about, yes, how do you spin this? What is the answer that you come up with? It's not about like checking off self-care. It reminds me of like the process versus product knitter, that like self-care is not about the end goal or the product or the outcome. It's about the process of doing it. So even in that challenge of like, can you look at something that feels like a growth edge for you or feels like something that you feel a little bit of shame around or like you wish could be different? and sit with it for a minute. Maybe you get to the point where you recognize how it fueled you. Maybe you know exactly how it does, and you've already thought about this, but it sounds like that's a really cool place to just start being curious
Yes.
those pieces of you instead of feeling critical or like trying to ignore them or shove them under the rug. So I really like that. I'm like,
and I think that for anyone who might be like, whoa, girl, what you talking about? I think that we like touched on a little earlier how if you're overcoming an obstacle, you're growing. And so I think it's almost better framed if you're like, this is an obstacle of some type in my personality. And so how is this obstacle a tool for my growth in the future? I think that's a softer, gentler way for people that might be turned off by like, I get real hot and angry and I don't want to talk about this. So that might be a better way to think about like, this is an obstacle, but it's a tool. And how do I use this tool within my own journey?
Yeah, because I like that phrasing too, because I think the term obstacle like immediately brings to mind like a barrier or something that gets in the way. But then like, there's also a part of an obstacle that's helpful in some way, right? Or like can be helpful. And I think about my life and other spaces I occupy and being a therapist, which is like usually folks who tend to be more introverted or more reserved and a little bit slower. And like a criticism I've consistently gotten across the board of like, maybe just like tone it down a little or like slow down a little or like the energy is a bit overwhelming at times. And I'm like, oh man, I wish I could like get rid of that part of me or change that part of me, and recognizing that like actually that's not something to fix. It was an obstacle that I've now learned how to use that's really helpful for things like this, where I'm energetic and passionate and excited to talk to people and can use it to help me instead of something that's like, oh, I have to fix it or find a different route to get around it and build this other road. Like, no, actually, you can just use it.
Right.
Yeah.
That's absolutely it. Like, if we use the examples that I gave tonight, like, my anxiety is most definitely an obstacle in my life. And without that physical panic attack happening, would I continue to be in a really uncomfortable space where I am unhappy with how I'm interacting with other people on social media, which should be a happy place for me? So how can I turn like something that brings me a lot of shame with my anxiety and my panic attacks into like, well, I'm glad I had the panic attack because it forced me to set a boundary that leads to a healthier and happier creative journey for me on Instagram.
Yeah. And it feels like it's important to viewing it in that way, and reframing it lets you hold space for that. Like, it's okay that this anxiety exists. I don't love it by any means. I'm not inviting it in to like hang out, but I make space for it because I recognize why it's important, why it got me where I am. And so that feels really important for folks to take a deeper look at. And it's week 3. So I feel like we're like, all right, we're getting our toes wet. Okay, we're jumping in. Like, all right, now let's go, because
it's time.
and that's so like on board with. I'm like, yeah, let's just dive in. Let's just do it. Like, what that happens? Like, I don't know.
I had a feeling you'd be down.
Yeah. I love it. I know you were sharing a little bit too about your self-discovery month. I don't know if there's anything else. I know I was like, oh, this is such cool timing, and that feels really like applicable to what we're doing here. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to share or plug specific to this month, specific to things coming up.
So we'll be voting soon on what comes for next month, and that'll be in my stories on Instagram. I usually do like a couple of stories where I like for Instagram to pick what our topic of the month is going to be, mostly because all of that stuff eventually trickles into Instagram as I'm thinking and processing and going through things and getting good feedback from all my patrons. But we are wrapping up this month of self-discovery in the next couple of weeks. On Patreon, I do like a weekly journal where we discuss some portions of my making and creativity and styling and all the other things that I do. But then I kind of break down how all those things are affecting me in the theme of the topic, and I get pretty vulnerable with my patrons. This is where I'm at. This is where I'd like to be. This is where I'm headed. And how I feel like that could apply to them as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then patrons can get more maker affirmations videos, which is where I talk about the topic of the month in the more specific, direct, actionable type of way. And then we have like transformational Q&As where you can ask me any question. Nothing is off the table. You can ask me what I'd like to name my next pet if you wanted to.
I love that.
So yeah, I think is that everything we do? Oh, we have worksheets too. Yes.
That's so cool. So if folks haven't been a part, it sounds like it's actually a great time to jump in, because they could even be involved over on your Instagram, choosing, voting at least what that topic would look like. And then it sounds like, honestly, it would just be more time like this, hearing from you, being vulnerable with you, sharing, finding out about what you want to name your next pet, and just doing a bit more of this.
Yes. Yeah, so you can do all of that in a smaller capacity for free on Instagram, and then tiers start at $2 because I wanted to make them as accessible as possible. Accessible as possible to people.
Words are hard.
Words are hard.
At night, that's when my brain shuts off, and it's done.
I'm like, it's time for ice cream. I'm done. I have a cooking test tomorrow. I'm done.
Exactly. I feel that. And I think I want to reiterate like how grateful I am for you being here. This was so enjoyable and so exciting. And I hope it's not the last time we talk about things
for sure
specific to this or not. And folks are really loving this collaborative. And so I'm hoping and planning that it'll happen again next year and be an annual thing. And so maybe we'll get to see you again and hear a bit more about what evolution has happened as a result of the end of 2020 finally wrapping up. And
oh Lord, let it be over.
And seeing what comes in the next year or so. And I know I would appreciate it. I know other folks would be super excited about it. And I just want to share my gratitude. I don't think I can ever thank you enough, not just for being here tonight, but like encouraging me, empowering me to do this. And yeah, I just feel really.
Okay, you have to stop now. Gratitude is my love language, so you need to stop because I'm gonna cry. So we're not gonna do that today.
Okay. Okay, that's it.
No, I am so I'm always incredibly grateful to be part of anyone's creative journey, but it was really, really satisfying to see you like come to fruition with this plan and like have it all happen, and it's just happening in such a beautiful way. So I'm very, very, very happy for you. With some underlines and some bolded text.
And some really fun gifts.
Yeah. Some, cute animals. All cute animals.
That's what I'm gonna search now from now on. Just cute animals and see if
it works.
Comes up. Alrighty. Any last final parting words of wisdom that we need to share with the people?
Take care of yourselves, because if you don't, nobody else will.
Yep. Awesome. Thanks so much, Maressa, Kayla.
All of it.
Right. Have a good night. Go eat some ice cream. Go enjoy the family. And
enjoy the rest of your night too.